First story. Growing up in a small town in Indiana, friendships were everything. With a population just under 2,000 people, your circle of friends was your world. Everyone knew everyone, so once you got close to someone, it felt like family. That's what my friendship with Dave was like, until everything changed over the course of one unexpected day. Dave and I met when we were 7 years old, first through baseball practice. Both of us were terrible at sports, but that made us stick together more. By the time we were in high school, we did everything together: gaming, fishing trips, hanging out after school. We'd grown up with a trust between us that I thought would never break. But then came senior year, everything shifted after that one night. It started like any other Friday. We had plans to meet up at Dave's house to play some video games, then probably crash at his place. Around 5 p.m., I got a text from him saying he'd be a little late because his mom asked him to run a quick errand. No big deal. I figured I'd wait and decided to grab a bite at the local diner before heading over. While sitting in the corner booth, eating my burger, I heard a group of familiar voices. I turned around and, to my surprise, saw Dave with a few other guys from our class, guys we never really hung out with. They were the popular crowd, the ones who threw parties every weekend, played varsity football, and dated cheerleaders. Dave wasn't just running an errand, he was with them. Now, you might think, so what? He has other friends. And sure, I get that. But what stung was the fact that Dave had been avoiding them for years, always saying how fake they were. He used to say how we didn't need that group, that we had each other. And there he was, laughing it up like they'd been best buds forever. I didn't approach him right away. Instead, I sat there, trying to figure out what to make of it. My phone buzzed again, a text from Dave. On my way soon, it read. No mention of where he really was, no invite to join. My stomach twisted, and for the first time, I felt something that I'd never felt before with Dave: doubt. A few minutes later, he left the diner with the group, not even noticing me sitting there. I followed him out, still unsure of what to do. I hopped in my car, keeping a distance as I watched them head toward a house on the other side of town. As I parked nearby, I realized they were going to a party Dave never told me about. I felt the sting of betrayal. We always went to stuff like this together, even if we weren't big on the party scene. But this time, he had kept it from me. The guy who used to make fun of these types of parties was now there, acting like one of them. I hesitated at first, but something inside me snapped. I decided to confront him, at least figure out why he didn't tell me the truth. So I walked up to the house and spotted him in the backyard, talking to a few people by the bonfire. "Dave!" I called out, catching his attention. His smile froze when he saw me. "Oh, hey, man. What's up?" he said, trying to act casual, but the awkwardness was obvious. "What's going on?" I asked, feeling my voice tighten. "You said you were running errands." He glanced around, clearly uncomfortable. "Yeah, I didn't think this was your thing. I was gonna tell you, but, you know." I was stunned. "You were going to tell me? Really? So why not just say something before?" The others around him started to sense the tension and slowly drifted away, leaving just the two of us. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I didn't think you'd want to come." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After all these years of being each other's wingman, of sticking together through thick and thin, he had decided that this time, I wouldn't fit in. "So you're just hanging out with them now?" I asked, unable to hide the hurt in my voice. Dave shifted on his feet. "Yeah, I guess. I've been trying to, branch out more, meet new people before college." College. The word hung in the air between us like a ticking clock. We both knew that once graduation hit, everything would change. But I never thought Dave would be the one to change before we even got there. "I get that, Dave, but you didn't even give me a heads up. You just ditched me." He looked down at the ground, and for a second, I thought he might actually apologize. But instead, he just shrugged. "It's not a big deal, man. We'll hang out tomorrow." That was the moment I realized our friendship wasn't what I thought it was. The trust one had in Dave, the years of loyalty, suddenly felt like they didn't matter. I turned and left the party, ignoring his half-hearted calls for me to wait. The next few weeks were awkward, to say the least. We still hung out, but something had shifted. Dave started spending more time with that new group, and I found myself feeling like a backup plan. We didn't fight or have a dramatic falling out. We just drifted apart, like two boats slowly moving in different directions. Looking back, I realize it was bound to happen eventually. High school friendships don't always survive the transition into adulthood. People change, and sometimes, that change means moving on from those you once held close. But the thing is, losing Dave taught me something important: you can't rely on someone else to define your worth. For so long, I thought our friendship was the most important thing in the world, but in the end, it was just one chapter of my life. I had to learn to let go and find myself outside of that friendship. Dave and I still see each other around town from time to time, but it's never the same. We're friendly, sure, but the closeness is gone. And that's okay. I've made peace with it. I've since found new friends, people who value me for who I am, and I've learned to trust my own instincts more. Sometimes, the hardest part of growing up is realizing that not every friendship is built to last, and that's not always a bad thing. Second story. It was a typical Tuesday morning. I was running late for work, as usual, cursing under my breath as I threw my lunch into my backpack and grabbed my keys from the counter. My commute wasn't anything special, an hour-long drive on I-95 with the same gridlock every day. Nothing ever happened. Just me, the road, and a bunch of other grumpy people stuck in traffic. But that day, something did happen. Something I'll never forget. I had barely gotten on the highway when the cars ahead of me started slowing down. At first, I thought it was just the regular rush hour congestion, but soon I saw flashing lights up ahead. An accident. I groaned, knowing this would probably make me even later for work. But as I got closer, something caught my eye. There was a man standing on the side of the road, waving his arms frantically. He was standing next to a silver sedan that had spun out, the front of the car completely smashed in. I pulled over, more out of curiosity than anything. I figured if someone needed help, there were already emergency vehicles there, but something about the way the man was acting made me feel uneasy. He looked desperate, like he wasn't sure what to do. Against my better judgment, I parked on the shoulder and got out of my car. The noise from the highway roared around me, the smell of burning rubber and oil filling the air. The man rushed toward me as soon as he saw me walking over. "Please, you have to help me," he shouted, his voice shaking with panic. "What happened?" I asked, looking past him to the wrecked car. "My wife, she's still in there," he said, pointing toward the driver's seat. My stomach dropped. Without thinking, I pushed past him and ran toward the car. The front end was crumpled like a piece of paper, and I could see the woman slumped over the steering wheel. The airbags had deployed, but she wasn't moving. "Is she breathing?" I yelled over my shoulder as I got closer. I don't know," he stammered, tears welling up in his eyes. I tried to get her out, but the door won't open. I reached the driver's side door and yanked on the handle. It was jammed. I pulled harder, my hand slipping from the sweat and oil smeared across the door. Nothing. Panic started to set in. I could see blood trickling down the side of her face, and her chest was barely rising. "Call 911. I shouted at the man, though I wasn't sure he could even hear me through his hysteria. I tried the back door, hoping it would give me better access. Thankfully, it wasn't as damaged, and I was able to force it open after a couple of hard tugs. Crawling into the back seat, I leaned forward, trying to get a better look at her. "Can you hear me?" I asked, my voice sounding way more uncertain than I wanted it to. No response. My heart pounded in my ears. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't a paramedic. I wasn't a firefighter. Hell, I wasn't even a doctor. But I knew I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I reached over and checked her pulse. Faint, but there. That gave me some hope, but I knew time was running out. I looked around the car, trying to figure out how I could get her out without making things worse. The front door still wouldn't budge, and the way the car was positioned meant I couldn't pull her out through the back seat without causing more damage. The engine was smoking now, and the smell of gasoline was becoming more pronounced. My mind raced. I needed a tool, something to pry open the door. I scrambled back out of the car and ran to my trunk. I didn't have much: a tire iron, a few bungee cords, and a first aid kit. Grabbing the tire iron, I rushed back to the front of the car and jammed it into the gap between the door and the frame. The man was pacing nearby, still on the phone with 911. "They're on their way," he said, but I barely heard him. I put all my strength into the tire iron, leveraging it with every ounce of energy I had. Slowly, agonizingly, the door started to creak open. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to reach in and unlock it from the inside. The door finally swung open, and I gently pulled the woman out, cradling her head as best as I could. Her breathing was shallow, but she was still alive. I laid her down on the grass away from the car, praying that help would arrive soon. Within minutes, I heard the sirens. Paramedics rushed over, quickly taking over as I stepped back, my hands shaking from adrenaline and fear. They worked quickly, checking her vitals, stabilizing her neck, and loading her onto a stretcher. As they carried her to the ambulance, the man, her husband, collapsed in relief, tears streaming down his face. He looked over at me, still stunned, and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you so much." I nodded, not knowing what to say. I just stood there, feeling both numb and wired at the same time. It was like my brain hadn't caught up to what had just happened. The paramedics were gone as quickly as they came, whisking the woman away to the hospital. The police arrived soon after, taking statements and asking questions, but it was all a blur. I told them what I could, but my mind kept going back to that moment in the car, the fear, the helplessness, the desperate need to do something, anything, to help. Eventually, they let me go. I got back into my car and sat there for a moment, my hand still gripping the steering wheel even though the car wasn't moving. I was late for work, but that didn't seem to matter anymore. Nothing really seemed to matter at that moment, except the fact that I had just risked everything to save a complete stranger's life. Later that night, I got a call from the police. The woman had survived. She was in stable condition at the hospital, and they said I'd probably saved her life by getting her out when I did. The feeling of relief was overwhelming. I didn't consider myself a hero, not by any stretch. But I was glad I was there, that I didn't just drive by like everyone else. The next day, I woke up and went to work like it was any other day. But something had changed. I had changed. I realized that life can turn on a dime, that in the blink of an eye, everything can go from normal to chaos. But I also learned that, in those moments, you have a choice. You can freeze, or you can act. And sometimes, acting means risking it all for someone you don't even know. Third story. I'll never forget the day my entire perception of friendship changed. It was a Friday evening, and I had plans with my best friend, Mark. We'd been inseparable since high school, always in sync. If you'd asked me a month ago, I would have said he was more like a brother than just a friend. That's why what happened that night completely blindsided me. Mark and I both worked for the same company, though in different departments. We'd often hang out after work, grab a few beers, maybe hit up a movie, or just chill at my place with some takeout. This Friday was no different. I'd just finished a long week, and we agreed to meet at our favorite pub around 7 p.m. I got there a little early, as usual. The place had a warm, dimly lit atmosphere with wooden tables and cozy booths. It was the kind of pub where you could unwind, not too fancy, but not a dive either. I grabbed a seat by the window, ordered a beer, and waited for Mark. 7:15 rolled around, and he still wasn't there. Mark was never late, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe traffic was bad. I sent him a quick text to check in. "Hey, you on your way?" No response. I sipped my beer, glancing at the door every now and then. By 7:30, I started to get a little annoyed. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. That was strange, but still, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe his phone died, or something came up at work. By 8 p.m., my patience was wearing thin. I ordered another beer and debated heading home. But then, I saw him. Mark walked in with a group of people I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe he got held up with some work friends, but the way they were laughing and carrying on, it seemed like they'd been together for a while. He didn't even see me sitting there. I watched as he and his group made their way to a booth on the other side of the pub. For a moment, I felt a pang of embarrassment, wondering if I should just get up and leave. But then, I decided to wait, see if he'd notice me. Another half hour passed, and I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, walked over to their booth, and tapped Mark on the shoulder. He looked up, surprised, and for a second, I thought maybe he'd explain. But instead, his face hardened. "Oh, hey. Didn't realize you were here," he said, glancing at his friends. "Yeah, I've been waiting for over an hour," I replied, trying to keep my tone light, but I could feel the frustration creeping in. "Sorry, man." "Something came up," he said, barely making eye contact. His friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Something felt off. This wasn't the Mark I knew. "You couldn't text me back?" "I've been sitting here waiting." Mark shrugged, and one of the guys at the table, some dude with a backwards cap, chimed in, "Maybe you should have taken the hint." I stared at him, then back at Mark, waiting for him to say something. But Mark just sat there, silent, avoiding my gaze. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a case of bad communication. Something deeper was going on. "I guess I should have," I said, my voice colder than I intended. Without waiting for a response, I turned and left the pub. I walked home that night, replaying the last few months in my head. There were signs, subtle at first. Mark had started making excuses to bail on plans, and when we did hang out, he seemed distant, distracted. I thought he was just stressed with work, but now I wasn't so sure. Over the weekend, I decided to confront him. I needed to know what had changed. Monday morning, I caught him in the break room at work. "Hey, can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Mark sighed, not even bothering to fake a smile. "Look, man, I've been meaning to talk to you about this." "About what?" He hesitated, then finally said, I feel like we've grown apart. I'm hanging out with a different group now, and I'm in a different place in my life. I didn't know how to tell you." I stood there, stunned. "You didn't know how to tell me, so you just ghosted me?" "We've been friends for years, Mark." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to come off like that. It's just, people change." That last part stung. People change. Sure, people change, but does that mean you just abandon the ones who've been there for you? "So, that's it? You're just done with our friendship?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. Mark looked uncomfortable. "I didn't mean for it to be like this. But yeah, I think it's time we both move on." I wanted to argue, to shout, to make him see how much this hurt. But in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes, you can't force people to care about you the way you care about them. And maybe that's okay. "All right," I said quietly. "Take care, Mark." And that was it. Our friendship, which had once felt unbreakable, ended in a coffee-stained break room with a few awkward words and an apologetic shrug. The following weeks were hard. Losing a best friend is a lot like a breakup, and for a while, I felt lost. But as time went on, I realized it wasn't just Mark who had changed, I had, too. Maybe we'd both outgrown the friendship, and I just hadn't seen it. I started hanging out with other people from work, reconnecting with old friends, and even trying out new hobbies I'd always wanted to explore. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I built a new routine without Mark in it. Looking back, I'm still hurt by how things ended. But I've also learned an important lesson: friendships, like all relationships, require effort from both sides. And sometimes, letting go is the healthiest thing you can do, even when it feels like the hardest.